Hi, and welcome back to the History Machine podcast. This is bonus episode number 4, and it's on chariotry. So, listeners, to give you a little bit of a breakdown of what's going on and what we're meant to cover, this was originally going to be a bonus episode on cavalry. But upon researching that and trying to pull together a bit of notes and get a very detailed episode on it, it was virtually impossible to talk about cavalry without first starting with chariotry. What is chariotry? Now, chariotry is a form of mounted warfare. Let's go all the way back to the start and try and explain, where did this come from? What happened to it? When was it in vogue? How was it used? When did it become obsolete? What is the story with it? So to start, in the late Neolithic era, people began domesticating animals. How easy are they to domesticate? And when were certain animals domesticated and in what order? Because that really affects human history.
There are reasons why we are not riding tigers into battle, as cool as it would be.
I know. It would be very impressive. We'll see if we can break in it. No, we won't. A tiger will tear us to pieces. But anyway, to start, in 4000 BC, roughly, give or take, come on, be easy with the dates. But in 4000 BC, in northern Pontic region of the world, that's modern-day Turkey and Ukraine, people started riding horses. At the same time, donkeys were being domesticated in Egypt and Southwest Asia. Nearly 1,000 years later, the Bactrian camel and the Arabian camels would be domesticated in the Iranian plateau and the Arabian Peninsula respectively. By about 2500 to 1750 BC, the Indian elephant is domesticated, now to an extent, we'll go into that at a later episode, by the Indus Valley civilization. By around 1000 BC, the North African bush elephant is domesticated, also to an extent, but that's just kind of a breakdown of what animals, for the purposes of warfare, were domesticated and roughly in what order. So there's quite a big gap between, the first horses and donkeys all the way to the North African bush elephant. But along the way, animals are kind of captured, relatively tamed, relatively domesticated, and used for combat. To start, the donkey, the very first one, it had only a very brief military service and was changed to a role of a beast of burden.
And of course being, commanding in World War I, as we all know.
Yes, those poor armies that were led by donkeys. Anyway, so their role was changed to being a beast of burden. Camels would only see a very limited use in battle and exclusively limited to a very small region of the world. Roughly around, as we said, Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. Very, very controlled. Very limited. That has to do a little bit with the geography, the terrain, even the temperatures, but camels didn't spread the way horses and donkeys spread. Horses, though, they would provide the basis for chariotry and cavalry for most of human history. Now, just as a little bit of a note, horses might have been ridden into battle from the earliest known periods. We don't really know what's the case, but the first mounted force that we know that is purely designed for the military is chariotry. So the earliest known usage of chariotry comes from 2500 BC in ancient Mesopotamia. The Sumerian depictions show warriors riding what we call battle cars, which are effectively heavy wooden vehicles with narrow bodies and tall fronts. To describe a battle car, it's like if you got a 5-year-old to say, I need you to design me a car that's being pulled. It's pretty bad. So it's going to be pretty bad. The driver sits ahead with an accompanying skirmisher who's going to throw javelins from quivers that are attached to the side of the vehicle. The battle car itself has 4 wheels. Each of them are a solid disc, and they're attached to a fixed axle, so there is no turning on this vehicle. If you did turn at high speed, you're probably going to flip this car.
Yeah, when you said tall and narrow, it's like, oh, that's kind of bad for flipping, and then you can't even pivot the axle, so it's just, oh god.
Oh, it's going to get worse, Cathal, before it gets better. So these battle cars, they have 4 wheels, each are the solid disc, they're attached to fixed axles. Along the existence of the battle car, there also existed 2-wheeled vehicles, which were likely used as transport vehicles as well, for messages or to transport officers at high speed across the battlefield. They're really kind of rinky-dink, maybe even just used for logistics. But battle cars, as we have known them from history, are drawn by 4 equids. Now, they're either pulled by donkeys or by ongers, or a hybrid of the 2 animals. Anyway, the reason that this vehicle is pulled by donkeys is because horses were not known in Mesopotamia at the time. and other equids had been domesticated and used before the introduction of the horse. So this battle car goes back so far in the past, the Mesopotamians don't even know horses exist, but they do have donkeys, and they're working with what they have. If we were to use a comparison here for like an airplane, we have the propeller engine. Like we want the jet, but we have the propeller, so we're going to work with it. So these donkeys or ongers, they would be controlled by a driver, and that driver would have a simple tether that would attach to a nose ring on the animals. Pulling these lines, which are connected to the nose rings, that would likely signal the animal to go or stop. Now it must have required, and this is very speculative here as well, because you can never be sure, if there was any kind of lateral movement along this thing, it would probably require voice commands or the usage of a whip. But even then, you're not sure if that's something they did. We are looking at the most basic vehicle possible. So the yoke of a battle car extends over the 2 inner animals of the 4 only. Now this would mean that the 2 outer animals will have less traction. You're getting lower value for the animals that are pulling it, because it's only the 2 ones inside are actually carrying most of the load. The 2 donkeys on the outside are getting even less to pull. This, however, could have been a benefit, because the 2 outer animals could have set a faster pace, and if that was the case, they'd force the inner animals to match them, so you'd get a little bit more value out of it. But ultimately, you're going to have 2 animals inside that are pulling, doing most of the weight. They're going to get tired first, and the ones outside are going to try to be driving the vehicle to go faster forward.
I know that neither of us use our engineering degrees that we both have, but this is a terrible design, and I feel qualified enough to say that.
I think so too. Now, it's only going to get worse, Colin. The tests for the battle car showed that these 4-wheeled vehicles could reach a maximum speed of 15 to 20 kilometers an hour.
So a fast run or a slow cycle?
Yes, or about 9 to 12.5 miles per hour. Now, this is not a great speed, but these vehicles themselves, they were heavy, and they were likely used to trample over fallen or retreating enemies. Now, this, once again, bit of speculation. They're heavy, they're cumbersome, they move in one direction, they're pulled by 4 animals, they're not pulled by 4 good animals, and that their speed is somewhat limited. Now also, the fact that there is a skirmisher on board, there's 2 guys, there's a driver, now this is how they operate it, there's a driver who's just trying to make them go and stop, and the skirmisher is there actually in combat, but that would suggest that there's possibly some kind of hit and run with the travelling with the vehicle. All this said, the vehicle itself could have been multifunctional. It could have been somehow utilised well by military command. You don't know, but you can just kind of go, it's not a good vehicle. This is the first vehicle in warfare, and it shows. These carts, as bad and good as and all as they are, they would have been state-owned. And they are the equivalent, I've already made the analogy of the aviation, these are the jet fighters of the day, or in the case maybe the propeller airplanes of their day. Just to show that they're state-owned, the Sumerian state of Umma would have had 60 of these vehicles and would have been like, whoa, look at our guys, they're fantastic.
Maybe it's just in the long tradition of state-owned vehicles where it's all going to the lowest bidder on the military tech. You know?
Possibly, yeah, that would explain a lot right here. So the battle car is a heavy, slow, poorly manoeuvrable and poorly designed vehicle. Once an opposing army had become used to seeing these in battle, they would have developed immediate methods and counter tactics to deal with them. I know it is moving at the speed of a quick jog, so it's slowly catching us. So as time moves on, by 2700 BC, there are no more depictions of battle cars anywhere. So the vehicle is now obsolete and abandoned. But what is needed after the battle car is a more lightweight and more manoeuvrable vehicle that has a better method of control. So from about the 2000 BCs onward, the horse begins to appear in Mesopotamia. It's almost 1,000 years after the initial appearance of the horse in Anatolia, you will see it in Mesopotamia. And now, once the horse comes in, it is the new engine that has so much more advantages than the donkey. So to put it in perspective, and just to give you a little bit of a history of horses at this time, they're smaller than what we are used to as a horse. And that's just the case, because for most of the horse's domesticated history, it involves breeding larger, faster, sturdier, and more durable horses. So if you look at the starting horse and work your way to today, you will see that most of that is just literally breeding to improve it to the point where you can pull something or you can run faster. That is just what the breeding of horses has been for literally millennia. Horses provide more speed and power And they're a lot more trainable than other equid counterparts, and that's very important. The adoption of the horse as the primary animal for the charity became swift. It's literally, as I said, it's the new engine. It's the new way to go. It's the new way to pull your vehicles. So around 2000 BC, we see the introduction of the four-spoked wheel. The spoked wheel is lighter than a solid wheel, so it reduces the overall weight of the animal to pull. So these early chariots are much lighter than the battle car. However, the single rein that's connected to a nose ring, that's still present. So this vehicle is still very poor to control. 1800 BC, the bit and bridle are evident. Also important, riding over enemies is a common motif on reliefs. You're going to have something where it's like, we defeated the enemy, we scattered their forces, crushed under the wheel of the chariot. You're going to have that as the common motif when people are talking about what is being used at this time with chariots. So it can be assumed that these horses and these chariots are running over people. 1700 BC, we see the two-rider chariot with the driver and the archer. Now this may have existed before this time, but it's now present on reliefs, so we have a definitive point where it definitely existed. In the late Bronze Age warfare, the chariot is the top tier, first class power weapon of war. They're numbered only in the dozens, but the presence of them indicates if you are a first-rate power or not. Now by now as well, it has spread across viciously. It has gone from Central Asia all the way to Europe, to North Africa, to India, China, other areas of Asia. It has reached even Britain and Ireland. Now variations on chariots at this point are common. Same way as variation on vehicles and cars. You're going to have modifications and alterations to it. One of the big differences you'll find in different areas is the change of the position of the axle located to the central point. So the idea is if you have the axle in the centre of the chariot, you can put on a bigger payload. If you move the axle to the back of the chariot, you can actually make it a little bit more stable. So you're trying to go, do I trade how much weight this thing can take versus how stable I want it to be to how fast I can turn, that kind of a thing. Ultimately, you will see at this time, around 1700 BC, there are simple, low-cost, rectangular cars. And these are powered by 3-man chariot teams that are pulled by 4 fully yoked horses. So each horse is effectively sharing the burden here properly. The 3-man team usually includes a driver, an archer, and a shield bearer. So now at this point we do have a movable force that can fire, can attack, and can, with the shield, protect themselves. To move on a little bit as we're moving through the development of the chariot, we are going to move on to its iconic usage in the New Kingdom of Egypt. Now, just to put it into perspective for how important culturally the chariot is to the New Kingdom Egyptians, entire chariots have been placed in tombs. They are chariots of lightweight construction with specific woods chosen carefully for various pieces and bent and warped properly into strange and useful shapes for construction. The wheels of these Egyptians had 4 and later 6 spokes, and they were set into naves on the axles. The axle is present at the rear of the car for increased stability. The floor of an Egyptian chariot is made of interwoven leather for increased lightness, and a wooden frame surrounds the front and side of the car, leaving the rear open for access. All of these modifications result in a lightweight, yet very strong chariot. They are sleek, well-manufactured, elegant vehicles. This is a high contrast to the lumbering battle car that we've seen at the very start. No expense has been spared here for the Egyptian chariot. This is the top shelf, best thing money can buy at the moment. The absolute pinnacle of their technology. And it shows. So the Egyptian chariot only weighs 34 kilograms, which is about 75 pounds. So one man could pick it up for transport, or you could have 2 men bear it with ease if it can't be driven due to difficult terrain. Tested speeds for these Egyptian-style chariots could reach speeds of 38 kilometers per hour or 24 miles per hour, twice the speed of any battle car.
You're no longer able to actually just outrun it if you're a fast runner.
Yes, yeah. They will ride you down. This is what will probably happen. The tested speeds indicate that that's what they could reach at the time. Now, it would have been possible, although not effective, to drive these chariots alone. A 2-man operation would have been the norm. So it would have had one driver and one warrior. Now the driver would control the direction and the speed of the chariot, while the warrior is free to use 2 arms for the bow. The driver could also hold a shield to protect the pair from opposing fire. So ultimately, you have a 2-man system on the chariot, and they are being pulled at that speed of about 38 kilometers per hour or 24 miles per hour. They're moving quite fast and able to kind of hit and run or hit and move or trample over enemies. Egyptian and Asian charioteers at this time were suited with kind of helmets and long bronze scale armour. The horses were likewise protected with heavy clothing, but on rare occasions could have been armoured up as well. The speed and manoeuvrability of the Egyptian chariot in conjunction with the usage of the composite bow made this a top-tier weapon system. The major drawbacks to the chariot was it required some skilled artisans and very pricey materials to manufacture it. Now that included the choice woods, the leather that had to be interwoven, the various metals that would have been used, along with the skill required to upkeep and maintain this thing. And that would include anything from animal fat to grease the axles to, repairing anything that could have been damaged, etc. Then that doesn't even consider, now, even all of that I'm saying about the chariot itself, you have to factor in that the animal care is required as well for 4 accompanying horses. To support this, ancient societies had to either have an affluent population capable of producing these craftsmen and horse owners, or have the bureaucracy to produce chariots and horses themselves. Often, the societies would allocate lands to subjects to breed and raise horses and to provide capable, athletic and strong warriors and drivers to use them. So it's kind of, I will give you some land, your promise now is to effectively field a chariot when we need this for warfare.
So just a huge amount of resources for one chariot, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And it's only one. Best case scenario, you need 2 warriors, you need 4 horses, and then you need effectively the vehicle to be built. Plus, as we said, everyone involved in the manufacture of that vehicle and the maintenance. So there's a lot of upkeep. There's a lot put into it. So you really understand that you do have to have an affluent and successful organised society to pull these things together. Also, just to go back to the horses, a horse at this time is no larger than a modern day pony, and they would begin their training in the first year of their life. Horses would be pulling chariots by their 3rd year, and they would become functional chariot animals by their 4th to 9th years. After 9 years, they're just not quite up to it anymore. Painstaking effort was made to raise these animals. Now that includes careful exercising, feeding, grooming, coordinated trotting. All of this training would allow the animals to cover a distance of about 60 kilometres or 37 miles in a day's march, or in battle to pull a chariot at top speed for a distance of 2 kilometres or 1.2 miles. So when you put down the numbers, you're like, it's not actually great. There's a lot of work in this, but it's ultimately, there's so much put into it just to make sure that you have the highest level of military equipment. The input to output ratio is not great. So chariots of the Egyptians were organised into groups of 10, and they'd each be led by the first charioteer. So 5 troops then would make a squad that would be under the command of a standard bearer of the chariot warriors, and then multiple squadrons would combine to form the battalion that would be led by the commander of the chariotry host. Now each Egyptian chariot had a runner attached to it who fought on foot and possibly to provide any support as required. Out of ammo, give it to me. Something, whatever it might be, they're there to provide extra support.
Wheel is stuck. Help. Push it out.
Your pharaoh needs you. The bow was the preferred weapon for the chariot, and it was the preferred weapon of most civilizations, but it was not the only one. Some states would have used spears, javelins, 2-handed polearms, and other weapons while fighting in a chariot. Now, opposing army chariots were known to charge directly at each other. Now, the standard chariot formation would be to leave a gap of at least 1 chariot's width, which probably significantly more, between each vehicle. Now, this would prevent collisions, and it would also allow 2 charging chariot lines to pass through each other. And as the lines came into contact, close quarter attacks were very common. And while during and after the charge, the archers would fire as they went. Once the line had passed through, they'd circle back and reform, and they'd charge repeatedly until one of the chariot lines gave way.
No smashing into one another because these are so expensive. you don't want to ruin it.
And you'd probably kill yourself in the process.
Yeah.
Although close quarter combat could happen with chariots, it would not be the preferred form of combat. Avoiding direct contact with infantry whenever possible was the preferred method. Now, obviously, it's because you've got an expensive piece of equipment, you've got a guy on it, you don't want to suddenly come across a couple of, be surrounded by a few men, not be able to get out and be killed. It would defeat the whole purpose of it. The importance of archery fire and the accuracy of your fire is apparent in Egyptian chariot training. The Egyptians would train by firing at ingots attached to posts while they were charging by, which is in itself a very, very difficult task. So there are tales of pharaohs shooting arrows right through ingots. Now, according to material science, this is an impossible task. So it is a little bit of a fib to say, I got my arrow and I shot it through one of those copper ingots, and I just wanted to show how impressive this pharaoh is with my compound bow. So it's obviously trying to show off like how the compound bow is very effective and that the pharaoh is an amazing shot and isn't it all impressive. But realistically, an arrow cannot punch through a copper-headed arrow can't, or even an iron-tipped arrow, they can't punch through a copper ingot like that. It's just not possible. So somebody is making up lies. We'll come to that later. Yeah, so that's some of the crack anyway with the pharaohs pretending. It's a difficult task. Let's not diminish it a little bit here. You are riding by at full speed, trying to loose an arrow to hit a single ingot standing on a post. It's difficult, and that will show you the level of skill that's obviously required for the warrior and the driver and the whole team working as a unit here. With all this in mind, we've kind of explained so much of what this chariot is, how it looks like, and what it looks like at the zenith of its usage. And we will return to a time and a battle that we've covered once before, but now with the intent to focus on the zenith of chariotry. This is during the reign of Ramses II, sometimes known as Ozymandias, and it is the Battle of Kadesh. Now, as I mentioned, we've covered this before. We did not really cover it in detail. We did not go into the fine information about it. We did not give it any of the background. We just kind of went straight into the stats to kind of show this is what Ramses is like. We will return and compare these stats and just see what the history machine, as it's updated, thinks of this again. But to get started on the Battle of Kadesh, this was fought between the forces of the New Kingdom of Egypt under Ramses II and a Hittite king, Muwatalli, who ruled Anatolia and Syria. What this conflict decided was who was going to control the modern-day area of Lebanon and southern Syria. This battle occurred in the 5th year of the new pharaoh Ramses II's rule. Everything we know about it is from detailed reliefs that were carved by the Egyptians under the orders of Ramses II, so no doubt this information is incredibly biased. But what this battle offers is the most complete picture of a late Bronze Age chariot and how it is used in warfare. And this alone is the reason for why we are examining this in detail. So the New Kingdom, aka the 19th dynasty, it came into control of an Egypt that had experienced internal and external crises for the best part of a century. Now, we don't have the details, but Egyptian territory had been lost and reduced, and their influence had effectively waned around the area that they're trying to effectively retake right now. So like Aurelian and the Barracks emperors, this decline would first be halted, and then areas regained by capable and dynamic military leaders. However, the Egyptians are going to do this 1,500 years before Aurelian, to tell you how old Egypt is.
And this is the New Kingdom.
So in the first year of the war, Ramses had advanced rapidly and he had taken an area called Amaru. After this successful year of campaigning, he returned home. So this bold and unexpected campaign had caught the Hittites by surprise, and at the time, there was no move made against it or immediately after it. For the first year, the Hittite king Muwatalli gathered forces from all across his domain, which included parts of modern-day Turkey and possibly as far south as Syria. He raised an estimated 3,500 chariots, and then a further 35,000 infantry.
That's money.
That is money. This is money. Think of, as I said, imagine that. That's 3,500 plots of land. Like if we're going to go with that model, that's 3,500 plots of land. That's 7,000 warriors This is just for the chariots, plus whatever the upkeep is for those horses.
Yeah.
It's money. It's a lot of money. You know what? Get a billionaire today to do it.
Don't give them ideas. They're bad enough as it is. Get the Saudi Development Fund on the line. We have an idea.
Get me the Crown Prince. So, King Muwatalli's next move was obvious. And the obvious move was to take the city of Kadesh. Now, this is just east of the recently conquered Amaru. So the area of Kadesh is geographically dominated by the northern end of the Bekaa Valley. Now, this is an extremely strategic location in this area of the world. So, unsurprisingly, within a year, Ramses II heads north through the Bekaa Valley. He's brought with him 4 divisions. Each one of them is named after an Egyptian god. There's 4 divisions, and there'll be the Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Set.
Oh, I was just also looking. Yeah, I was looking up the Ptah one, and it is pronounced, and it's because that comes directly from Egyptian. It doesn't. Most Egyptian translation things come through Greek, and you don't pronounce the P. But Ptah is just like direct from Egyptian, so the P is pronounced. Still a weird spelling.
Each of these divisions were raised in different regions of Egypt, and each contained chariots, foot archers, and spearmen. Now, the various sizes and unit ratios of each division is unknown, but effectively, the 4 of them are raised and pulled together to make the Royal Army. So while still located south of Kadesh, Ramses encounters 2 Arabs from a tribe who claim that they have been sent by their tribal leaders and that their tribe was looking to defect to Ramses. Now, when questioned by Ramses further to determine where this tribe is from, where they located, and how can they join his assembled army, he was informed that the tribe is currently north with the Hittite king. Now, the Egyptians recorded that this was disinformation by the Hittites, and these 2 men were spies. Now, believing the 2 men, Ramses proceeds to head northwest of Kadesh with the Amun division, and he encamps with a portion of his army. The other 3 divisions are still on the march north when an Egyptian scout brought in 2 captured Hittite scouts. These 2 captured scouts were at least beaten, if not tortured, and then they provided information when questioned by the pharaoh, who asked, "Where is the Hittite army?" only to be informed that they were at the city of Kadesh. That is only 5 kilometers or approximately 3 miles away from the Egyptian camp. So, Ramses calls together a council of his senior officers and he berates them for their piss-poor intelligence efforts, and he sends out orders for the 3 remaining divisions to march with haste and combine with his troops as soon as possible. Now, even with this quick and sound reaction by Ramses, it is already too late. King Muwatalli had sent 2,500 of his chariots to intercept the divisions of Ra, who were caught alongside the road while they were in marching order. And unsurprisingly, this division is soundly defeated and they're put to flight. These successful Hittites, in their 2,500 chariots, they swung north to attack the Egyptian camp. So officers of this recent ambush are seen racing into the camp just to notify the pharaoh moments before the Hittites attack from behind. So, Cathal, I would like to say you were to take the next piece of information with a grain of salt. But this is going to have so much salt, we could mine this for money. The Egyptian records claim at this time that the pharaoh, Ramses II, rode out alone in his chariot behind his 2 horses named Victory in Thebes and Mut is Contented. Those are the names of his 2 horses.
I mean, that would still work as a racehorse name today. It's about the level of elaborate that they are.
So the pharaoh, with his 2 horses by himself, single-handedly cuts down hundreds of Hittites, and then he doubles down to the task of personally routing a 1,000-man enemy supporting chariots who are sent in to aid the first group. Now, also, it's important to note that at this time, King Muwatalli was cowering in fear with the remaining of his infantry army behind the safety of a river, while Ramses II, Ozymandias the Great, pushed the Hittites single-handedly into the river to drown. Now, despite being abandoned by his other chariots and infantry, the bitter Ramses II won the day, and King Muwatallis looked for terms of peace. So this is the official record of what. Remember, one guy John Wicking his way through this whole situation.
It's kind of on the level of like North Korean dictators and their like
Yeah.
golfing prowess, getting a hole in one on every hole of the course. You know, it's
The first time they ever played,
Yeah.
and then they retire from golf forever because they've already played the perfect game. Yeah. So keep in mind that is the official story. Now for what really happened, or what possibly happened. So Ramses II wisely retreated. Muwatalli pushed onwards, reaching as far south as Damascus before the year's campaign had ended. Now the two powers then make a peace agreement which leaves the Hittites in control of Amurru and Kadesh. So ultimately they're left in control of it. It is somewhat, it's kind of down as a draw sometimes, this whole campaign. It is Ramses' only known loss, if you could call it a loss. Because he's had at least 15 campaigns we know of. We don't know all the details, but we know he campaigned at least 15 times. He's meant to have never lost a battle, but this is the one where you kind of go, oh, come on now, this is probably not a good sign here. But this is probably Ramses at his worst, which is kind of crazy. But then again, all of this information is taken from the Egyptians, so we have to be very careful, what kind of conclusions we come to, even though we're going to come to some conclusions, but we have to be kind of a little bit careful of that. So the Egyptian reliefs and carvings of this engagement, they show Hittites being repulsed and killed in the Egyptian camp. But nevertheless, the Hittites are in the Egyptian camp, and that's never a good sign. Usually when we talk about a battle where it's like, and then the camp was surrounded by enemies, it's never a good situation.
Yeah.
But what we can gather happened for the Battle of Kadesh is as follows. Ramses was given disinformation regarding the location of the Hittite army and the loyalty of various tribes that were meant to be fighting for the Hittites. He's given disinformation about this, and he's working with that, thinking it's the truth. Ramses is encamped when the Amun division discovers information from captured scouts as to the actual location of the Hittites, and he attempts to correct his error. Now, the Ra division is caught on the march, and they're ambushed on their flank by 2,500 chariots. The Hittites then press their advantage, and the Pharaoh's Amun division is suddenly and overwhelmingly attacked by Hittite forces while they're encamped. Ramses withers under this assault. He fights valiantly in a corner of the camp when chariot troops, the Niran, these are the Egyptian youths, they arrive in the nick of time and they put disordered Hittites to flight. Ramses, in the meantime, manages a successful attack in the corner of his camp. Muwatalli sends an additional 1,000 chariots to aid his assault on the camp. It was going relatively well, but these people are soundly beaten back by Pharaoh and by the Niran, the youths, and the recently arrived Patad division. The attacking Hittites are defeated and they receive heavy casualties. The Hittite king, Muwatalli, and the majority of the Hittite infantry remain behind the city of Kadesh, and they do not participate in this battle. King Muwatalli doesn't commit his infantry. He's likely realising that they would kind of be fed piecemeal to the fast-charging chariots of the Egyptians, they'd be picked off by long-range shooting of Ramses' archers, and they didn't want to cross a ford between his troops and the Egyptian camp. So Ramses, despite this successful rally and stabilisation and rout of the enemy, he decides to retreat despite the win. What is unusual about this battle is it isn't the usual set-piece engagement you would expect when chariots are in battle, because normally chariots are just deployed on the wings. The Hittites are shown, for this battle particularly, to be running 3-man chariots, with one driver, one shield-bearer, and one spearman. Now, this combination may not have been the norm for the Hittite chariots. We would expect them to fight in a very similar fashion to the Egyptians, but possibly they were equipped in this fashion for a shock assault, and if so, the Egyptians took note on their reliefs. Now, the Hittite king, Muwatalli, is the only enemy shown with a quiver in his chariot in these carvings. The idea might just be to kind of single him out, this is the Hittite king, but also it could be a case that the Egyptians are trying to go, look how many of these enemy chariots were equipped for close quarter combat. If indeed the Hittites were equipped for close quarter combat only for this battle, it would explain the swift, ranged counterattack that put them to flight once the element of surprise was lost. Now, if so, this is a relatively new tactic, even though it's the end of the Bronze Age and the very tail end of chariotry warfare. It would be a relatively new tactic because early release from Seti I, who's Ramses' dad, it shows that the Hittites used 2-man chariots with a bow. The Nearian chariots, these are the Utes, the Nearian chariots and the Hittite chariots are shown as fighting lines abreast, with usually one chariot width between them to allow for the charge through of the enemy chariot line. Now each line, as we mentioned earlier in chariot warfare, would be expected to pass through the other while archers fired as they went and spears attacking for the brief moment of close quarters combat. The lines would reform and the charge would happen again and again until one side gave way. Now the Egyptians, for this battle, they'd have a distinct advantage in range and rate of fire if the Hittites were solely equipped for close combat. So what makes the Battle of Kadesh so important is that it is the greatest and largest chariot battle we know of, and it appears at the very end of the Bronze Age. Cathal, after this, the Battle of Kadesh, it is the largest known chariot battle we know of. Now we've covered this in our very first episode, but what does the History Machine think of it now?
So, yeah, this is an interesting one because this is our first episode. This was an older version of the History Machine. I think since then most of the code has been rewritten. It's been trained on a lot more data and everything, so it's changed its opinion. So the last time we looked at it, it considered this a masterstroke by Ramses, like huge win over expectation. Now it does feel that Mu'tali had the advantage. They were both big armies, so it doesn't have them as huge advantage, but he did, ambush Ramses, so it felt maybe he had kind of 55% chance of winning or something. Ramses stealing, depending who you ask, a draw or a win out of what looked like a certain defeat at a point is still very impressive, but it's not getting as carried away as it did before. Similarly, it feels that Ramses dealt about the amount of casualties you'd expect in this battle. It didn't think that whereas I think the last time we went through it, it had him dealing massive casualties. However, the History Machine now has gotten way more extreme in thinking that Ramses did a very good job not losing his whole army. Now, he certainly did take heavy casualties with Hittites getting right into camp and everything, but the fact that they weren't totally obliterated and they had enough to rally, the History Machine just considers very impressive. Even though, yeah, given the size of the armies, it still thought he had a good chance of winning. It really thought it would be a totally Pyrrhic victory.
Okay. That's kind of fascinating because to think about it, like it's obviously said, hey, listen, you did the kind of job I expected you to do and you didn't lose as badly as I thought you were going to lose. And that makes sense when it kind of looks at it and says, this is a bit of an ambush, there's this happening, there's chariots attacking you, they're cutting into your infantry, your army is on the march. So the History Machine is kind of looking at that going, yeah, you're going to get massacred.
Pretty much.
That's to be expected. I think what it's in, and it's very interesting, what it's looking at then is the idea of, yeah, but they're in your camp now, your back is against the wall, you should be wiped out. That is the impressive recovery and the impressive win, or the impressive salvage, we'll say, to fight another day and to continue and campaign. And, this guy, remember, he's 5 years into his rule now, he's going to have a very long and successful reign. Could all have been ended right here.
The History Machine appreciates when your intelligence is terrible and your spies don't do their job, because then it gives you a challenge and you can show how you do under pressure.
Yeah.
We had very fixed ways for chariots to fight, and then he was put in a situation where he had to improvise.
I wonder what happened, Cathal, if we fed it the information that it's him beating 1,000 chariots by himself. We should include that and put it up. Just crunch those numbers.
If you want to just give me like a row of data with what you want and give it to me, I'll just send you on the result like before you've edited it or something.
We'll do that. It'll be part of this episode. That'll be fun. So listeners, as an interesting test, we decided that we would inspect the official Egyptian story to see if it holds water. And with all of that in mind, let's take a relook at the Battle of Kadesh, where we focus on Ramses II single-handedly taking out the Hittite army. So, Cathal, what does the History Machine think of that?
So, out of curiosity, we ran the numbers for the Battle of Kadesh as Ramses told it. And, the History Machine was very impressed. If these claims are true, that is a full 0.99 wins over expectation. It thought he only had a 1% chance to win it, but there, 1 in 100, he pulled it off. And the casualties dealt 99% more than expected. Yeah, it really seems crazy that one man could take out hundreds of opposing warriors, but he did just that, according to himself. So, not too much else to say about that, other than it was kind of a handy sanity check to make sure the history machine was working as intended, because obviously there's no way that these figures make any real-world sense.
I'd believe the official record, Cathal. I would believe the official record. He is quite the guy. Now, listeners, perhaps we haven't gone into depth exactly with the figures of the history machine, but the values that we are often including with the decimal points from 0 to 1, it asymptotes, as in, it'll never ever approach 1 and it'll never ever approach 0. So 0.5 is right down the middle. But the closer you get to 1, the more ridiculously over the top impressive it is. So a 0.99 is pretty much a perfect victory. So that's what it's like for our man, Ozymandias. I was going to say, look upon my works, you mighty, and despair. Yeah, so figures like that. Who needs it? Who needs an army when you have him? But when you think about it, it's one guy who doesn't die and defeats an entire army. That's about as close to 1 as you can get. After this point, we're never going to see a large chariot force used in combat ever again. The Bronze Age collapse will occur approximately in 1200 BC, and with it, there's the collapse of the government-supported system, which allows the building and the maintenance of so many chariots. The replacement of the chariot would take centuries, and by the time that these societies had recovered, which was also centuries, the chariot gave way to a new form of horsed unit, the cavalry. So once the Assyrians decline and fall, the usage of the chariot in Mesopotamia and Babylon and surrounding areas is practically ends. Now there's exception of kind of super heavy 4-horse scythe chariots, and they'd only be mustered in limited numbers for very select battles. Now, we can't be sure, but the scythe chariot would have had a driver lash the horses into a frenzy and charge at a compact enemy formation, ride through with these scythes, cutting up and trampling units as it smashes into them. Now, this would create gaps in the line, which could be taken advantage of. Now, once again, don't know. This is just speculative, like how are these things meant to be used once chariot warfare is somewhat obsolete. Of course, any usage of the chariot later would have to be used in conjunction with other experienced troops in a coordinated attack. Tactics would be honed to deal with chariots, such as opening up lines to allow them to pass through, showering them with projectiles, before they reach you, or to form a very fine line of spear points and just try and take them out before they get to you. Now, despite tactics developed to hard counter chariots, they would be continued to used in places like Mesopotamia and the surrounding areas till about 100 BC. It doesn't just disappear once it is obsoleted. It will linger for quite a amount of time. That aside, transport chariots are still a very viable option in a well-structured army. Now, for most of known history, chariots would be used to transport or evacuate warriors to and from the battlefield. Both Persian and Chinese emperors would use chariots in this fashion. Command platform chariots on the battlefield is not unheard of either.
Yeah, it just that makes sense. I imagine they could be done at much lower cost than when you have to make them state of the art for fighting other chariots, and when you can just basically make a horse and cart to pick people up.
Yeah, exactly, and just get you out of there in the nick of time if needed. So another example of chariot warfare still in use around the 100 BCs is the Garmantes of North Africa. They would use chariots in battle in about the 100 BCs, around that era. The Celtic peoples would use it the longest of any Europeans. They'd use it in Italy, Gaul, Britain, and to an extent, I'm going to say this, the chariot did make it as far as Ireland, hooray. It made it as far as Ireland, but it actually was very rarely ever used in battle.
Oh, I actually have a side note on this, because a couple of weeks ago, I was in the Rathcrowan Visitor Centre in Tulsk, County Roscommon, which is...
Ooh, lovely.
It is an actual historical site, but it's more important in Irish mythology than actual Irish history, I would say. It was obviously a big centre at one point in Ireland's prehistory, and it shows up in the Táin Irish mythology story.
it's the Irish equivalent of like the Iliad or the Odyssey. It's a very similar style.
Yeah, and it's basically the capital city of one of those sides in that. But in the museum anyway, they did have a yoke from a chariot, but they pointed out this chariot's actually from Britain. We're pretty sure we had chariots in Ireland, but we haven't found one yet.
Yeah.
But then also, like, wood rots, wood gets repurposed. You don't get much archaeological evidence of things that are made of wood, or leather.
Exactly. So yeah, there's very little as the idea that as far as the chariot will go as far as Korea and as far as Ireland, it's kind of the idea of but probably not a lot of them. It's and also if they're very expensive, there's the big upkeep, there's all of that on top of it. So you kind of go, you really have to have a complex society that can support that. And if it is just a couple of villages, it's not really going to be the case.
Yeah, Ireland was extremely decentralized. Like, we didn't have cities until the Vikings came along.
Yeah.
They're not going to be many. It's only going to be like the very richest petty kings that have them.
Exactly. You are going to have cavalry, but you just probably won't have... You just don't have chariots. It's also the terrain. Anyone, would realise the terrain isn't really suitable for it either. A lot of stone.
Stones and bogs, and at that time, forest. It's tricky.
Very tricky. So just not really suitable. Probably used for, ceremonial purposes and whatnot. That's the usual go-to. So they weren't really used very much in Ireland, but Julius Caesar, of all people, he would encounter chariot warfare in Britain. And he'd be facing 2 horse-light chariots and describe the tactics of the noble-driven charioteers that he faced. Now, this is kind of crazy because, Julius Caesar, it's like they're fighting a time machine kind of a thing of he's invading Britain, he's experiencing the British warriors, they're looking at it, and they go, whoa, okay, wow, chariots, weren't expecting this. It's just one of those, not to say a modern warfare. Okay, the Wright brothers plane is flying into a modern warfare. We got to shoot it down, but it's... The Romans were not expecting chariot warfare at all. They're kind of this is a mixture of novelty and unusual. We have given the chariot a little bit of a bad name in terms of, it's not great over terrain and it requires such a heavy upkeep and it can only move in these various directions to a small extent. It's got limited control and it's so obsoleted by just regular cavalry. But I'm going to read you a quote from Julius Caesar about how this was used in Britain and how he was quite impressed by it. Quoting Julius Caesar, quote, "First of all, they drive in all directions and hurl javelins. And so, by the terror of the horses and the noise of the wheels, they generally throw ranks into confusion. When they have worked their way in between the troops of the cavalry, the chariot fighters jump down from the chariots and fight on foot. In the meantime, the charioteers gradually retire from the battle, deploying their chariots so that, if the fighters are pressed by a multitude of the enemy, they may have a ready means of retiring to their own side. Thus they show the mobility of cavalry and the stability of infantry in battle, and by the daily use and practice become so accomplished that they are ready to gallop their teams down the steepest of slopes without the loss of control, to stop and turn them in a moment, and run along the draught pole, stand on the yoke, and then most quickly dart back into the chariot." End quote. So this is kind of an example of, hilly terrain, heavily armed gentlemen just being able to kind of hop in and out of chariots and wheel around and throw jabs. So it's quick, fast skirmisher warfare that ends up deploying a heavy infantry unit when they're finished. So obviously, even though the chariot is somewhat obsolete in mainland Europe and across Asia, you will see that in Britain, they're developing different tactics, different styles, how to use it, and there's a nimble, acrobatic method from the driver and the warrior that they're able to be literally running up and down this, literally running up and along this chariot. It's an impressive piece of work for a piece of technology that is meant to be obsolete. So can't quite write it 100% off, but that's just an example of it used far beyond its sell-by date. With that little bit of kind of chariot love there, we're going to show the problems of chariots as well. The first is, they are very expensive to make. And when it comes down to ancient warfare and regular warfare, cost is always an issue. They require skilled craftsmen for the construction and for their repair. They require animal fat to grease the axle wheels, and that's an expensive resource. The vehicle itself produces extra weight for horses to pull, thus requiring multiple animals to ride a chariot. So a 1 4-horse, or you can say 2, but I'm going to go for 4. A 1 4-horse chariot could really be allocated to 4 regular horsemen. And you're getting more value for your money there. The chariot itself is limited by terrain, unless you've got some very skilled Britons, and it's almost impossible to use on uneven or wooded terrain. Now, cavalry is much more flexible on these kind of terrains when compared to chariots. Now, cavalry isn't the be-all, end-all here. They have problem with woodland as well, but not as much of a problem as a chariot would. Another part is because of the bulk of the chariot itself. It limits the number of possible formations you can have. You can have more cavalry formations than you can have chariot formations. So that's ultimately the problems you do get with a chariot.
They are super cool, but too expensive.
Yeah, that's it. That's kind of it. It is. Now, to keep in mind, when the battle car and the chariot start, the horse isn't strong enough to really be effectively used as cavalry. The entire invention of the chariot is to literally try and get the most usage out of the horsepower you have. It's adding more horses, it's putting on more thing, it's making, it's adding more horses to the vehicle, it's making the vehicle as light and sleek and, elegantly designed as possible. It is trying to maximize this idea of quick, rapid movement in warfare. And that, in the ancient world, is the be-all, end-all. So that is why the chariot is so important. Why it happens. If the horse, when it was domesticated, was a larger animal, we never would have seen the chariot. We probably would have seen the cart pulling for logistics, but we wouldn't have seen the battlefield chariot. So once it is obsoleted in the ancient world, what is left for the charioteer in ancient societies? And what is left is pretty much gambling. Chariot racing is going to outlive the western section of the Roman Empire. It is going to be the sport people watch, they cheer on, they have their favourite coloured teams, whether it be green or blue, and and they're going to enjoy it. It is very much for a combination of sport and for ceremonial purposes. And when it comes to ceremonial purposes, the one that always jumps to mind, especially in the Roman one, for the usage of the chariot, is for Roman triumphs. Now, it tells you how far back triumphs go, and it tells you how far back the chariot goes, that when the successful general is triumphantly marching through the city of Rome, he is on a chariot. They're not on horseback, they are in a special designed, special chariot. It almost shows a combination of, look, I've got an expensive thing, and am I great? And it shows the value that the chariot had in ancient societies. That of all the things they could do, when they have the triumphant march, they are using chariots. And if you're Pompey, you're pulling them with elephants. But you have chariots. That's what you have. It is the ultimate show of bling and wealth and your civilization's ability to produce vehicles for warfare. So I think we're going to close it up at that. So thank you very much for listening. Just to even say, there's been a delay in this episode simply because there's been a lot of work put into other stuff on top of it. So you can expect to see a few come out as well, just by themselves. So that'll be fun. As I said, this episode spiraled a bit out of control. It became multiple episodes, so we'll probably have a few more out.
The horses just gradually got bigger, and you had to keep making more episodes. Start with the chariots, then you get bigger, you do cavalry, then bigger, and now it's elephants.
Now it's elephants, yeah. And that'll lead into a couple of civilizations that I was just doing general research on. I go, you know what? They're going to get their own episodes. So that's fair. So thank you so much for listening. I have been Niall.
And I've been Cathal.
And we'll see you again soon.